Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Pesachim. We are up to Perek Daled Mishnah Chet. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilui Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbai, and Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov, Menuchatam beGan Eden, Amen. The Mishnah lists 6 practices of the Jews of Yericho that the sages disagreed with. The first of these involved working on Erev Pesach. Shisha Dvarim Asu Anshe Yericho. The residents of Yericho did 6 things of which the sages disapproved. Al Shelosha Michu Be'adam. For 3 of the practices, the sages protested against them. Val Shelosha Lo Michu Be'adam. But for 3 of the practices, they did not protest against them. Ve'elu hen Shelo Michu Be'adam. These are the 3 practices for which the sages did not protest against them. Malkivin Dikalim Kolayom. A. They would graft date palms the entire day of Erev Pesach, even after midday, when work is prohibited everywhere. And the commentaries explain they inserted branches of male date palms which produce fruit into female palms which do not produce fruit, so that the females would become productive. Now, to prevent a financial loss, Davar Aved, work is permitted even on Chol Moed and certainly on Erev Pesach. The people of Yericho maintained that failure to graft their trees at the right time would result in a loss and was therefore permitted, whereas the sages held that this was not a case of financial loss, but they did not protest since there was some basis for the people's actions. B. V'chochin et Shema. They would link the first 2 verses of the Shema, meaning they would recite the 2 verses of Shema Yisrael and V'ahavta together without saying Baruch Shem between them. Now, we know it is a biblical obligation to recite the Shema twice daily, once in the morning and again in the evening. The first paragraph of Shema is in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 6, Psukim 4 through 9, which begins with the Pasuk, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and then continues, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. Now the rabbis instituted that between these 2 Psukim we should add, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. The people of Yericho did not add this sentence. However, the sages did not protest, because even one who does not say this sentence still fulfills the obligation of reciting the Shema according to the Bir Halacha in chapter 61, Halacha 13, letter 13 of the Bir Halacha. Again, for practical law, always look in the Acharonim and the Poskim that one follows. Continuing in the Mishnah, see the Kutzrin, the Gutshin, Lifnei Omer. They would reap the new crop of grain and stack it before the Omer offering was brought on the 16th of Nisan. Although the rabbis had prohibited this out of concern that one might come to eat from the new crop, which is biblically forbidden. As a background, we know grain from the new crop, what we call Chadash, may not be eaten until the Omer offering is brought on the 16th of Nisan, which is the 2nd day of Pesach, as the Torah writes in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 23, Psukim 9 through 14. The rabbis decreed that the new crop may not even be stacked in the fields before the Omer is brought, because they were concerned that the workers might eat from it. The residents of Yericho did not obey the rabbinic law, but the sages did not protest against them because the chances of people eating from the new crop are small. The Mishnah continues, Ve'elu shemichu be'adam. These are the 3 practices for which the sages did protest against them. A. Matirin gamziyot shel hekdesh. They permitted using the new growths of trees that belonged to the temple treasury, because they held that the prohibition of Me'ilah applies only to the tree as it was when it was consecrated and not to its later growths. Now, ordinarily, one who benefits from temple property transgresses the biblical prohibition of Me'ilah, as the Torah writes in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 5, Psukim 15 and 16. However, the people of Yericho permitted benefit in this case because they followed the opinion brought down in Mishnah Masechet Me'ilah, chapter 3, Mishnah 6, that Me'ilah does not apply to that which grows from an item after it was given to the temple. Now, the sages protested because even if the growths are not subject to the biblical prohibition of Me'ilah, they are prohibited rabbinically, as the Gemara writes on page 56b. Me'ilah, again, is basically stealing consecrated property that was donated to the temple. The Mishnah continues, V'ochlim mitachat hanisharim b'Shabbat. B. They would eat the fallen fruit from beneath the trees on Shabbat, because they might have fallen off the tree before Shabbat and therefore not muktzah. The sages protested because it's possible that they fell on Shabbat and that possibility suffices to make them prohibited. Now, objects that are not expected to be used on Shabbat are classified as muktzah, literally meaning set aside. The rabbis decreed that such objects may not be moved on Shabbat. A fruit on a tree is muktzah because detaching it from the tree on Shabbat is forbidden. Moreover, even if it fell off the tree on Shabbat, it is still muktzah because something that was muktzah when Shabbat began remains in that state throughout the day. The people of Yericho ate fruits that they found under trees on Shabbat, although they did not know whether the fruits had fallen off on Shabbat and are muktzeh or before Shabbat and are not muktzeh. They ruled that such fruits are permitted in view of the rule that rabbinic prohibitions do not apply in cases of doubt. We call savek de rabbanan nekula. The sages, however, held that muktzeh is an exception to this rule. And the Mishnah Berurah discusses that in chapter 497 in Orach Chaim Sivkatan 8. The Mishnah continues, Siv v'notnim pe'ah le'arak, and they would give pe'ah from vegetables, even though the obligation of pe'ah does not apply to vegetables. And the sages protested because if people think that it is pe'ah, they will not tithe it. Now, pe'ah, literally corner, is the part of the growing crop that a farmer must leave standing for the poor to take, as the Torah writes in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 19, pasuk 9, and chapter 23, pasuk 22. Produce that is pe'ah does not need to be tithed, meaning there is no obligation to separate teumot and masrot from it. Now, the obligation of pe'ah does not apply to vegetables, as the Mishnayot write in Masechet Pe'ah, chapter 1, Mishnah 4. Therefore, even if a farmer designated part of his vegetable field as pe'ah, the vegetables that grew there must be tithed. The people who take the vegetables, however, will not realize this, and they will eat them in their untied state, tevel, which is forbidden. Therefore, the rabbis protested against them. And that is the end of Mishnah Chet. Mishnah Tet now continues, similar to the Mishnah we just finished. This Mishnah lists 6 acts that were performed without the sages being consulted first. Shishat Dvarim Asa Chizkiyahu HaMelech. King Chizkiah did 6 things. Shishat Dvarim Asa Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Al Shelosha Hodulo, the sages agreed with him concerning 3 of them. Val Shelosha Lo Hodulo, and they did not agree with him concerning the other 3. Now, although the sages disapproved of these 3 actions, they did not rebuke Chizkiah for them because he did them only once. The people of Yericho, however, were rebuked because their practices were ongoing. That's the difference between the Mishnah. Why it doesn't say the word Michu, it says Hodu. Now, the Mishnah lists the 3 deeds that the sages supported. A. Gerar atzmot aviv al mita shel chavalim. He dragged the bones of his father Achaz to the grave on a bed of ropes and not on a bed that befits a king, so that the disgrace would atone for Achaz's sins. Now, King Chizkiah's father Achaz, the previous king of Yehuda, served idols and led people to abandon the service of God, as the Tanakh speaks about, the Torah speaks about in Melachim part 2, chapter 16. Ve'odulo, and the sages agreed with him. Bi kitat nechasha nechoshet ve'odulo. He crushed the copper serpent that Moshe had made because people were worshipping it, and the sages agreed with him. Now, when the Bnei Israel in the wilderness complained about the manna, the portion of food that fell from the sky, God sent poisonous snakes against them. After they repented, God told Moshe to make the replica of a serpent. All who looked at it were healed, as the Torah says in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 21, Psukim 4 through 9. In later years, people mistakenly thought that the object itself had healing powers and began worshipping it. Chizkiah therefore had it destroyed. And C. Ganaz Sefer Rifot Ve'odulo. He hid the book of remedies, and the sages agreed with him. Now, this book listed the healing properties of various plants. Chizkiah hid it because people were using its instructions to cure themselves so quickly that illness did not inspire them. It did not inspire in them feelings of submission and humility, the point that God sometimes sends illnesses to people. The Mishnah now lists the 3 deeds that the sages did not support. Al Shelosha Lo Hodulo. They did not agree with Chizkiah concerning the following 3 deeds. A. Kitzatz delatot shel echal v'shigiran lemelech Ashur. He cut down the doors of the temple that were made of gold and sent them to the king of Ashur as payment for tribute. V'lo Hodulo, but the sages did not agree with him because he should have relied on God to provide the required money. And the commentaries explain Sancheiriv, the king of Ashur, demanded large sums of gold and silver from King Chizkiah in return for removing the Ashur army from the southern kingdom of Yehuda. Because Chizkiah was unable to collect the full amount, he sent Sancherib the doors of the temple, which were made of gold. This is brought down in Melachim part B, Kings part B, chapter 18, pasuk 16, with Rashi. The sages objected because they held that Chizkiah should have relied on God to provide the funds in a way that would not disgrace the temple. B. Satam me Gichon ha'elyon v'lo odulo. He stopped up the water of the upper Gichon so that the army of Ashur coming to besiege Jerusalem would not have drinking water. But the sages did not agree with him because he should have trusted that God would protect the city as he had promised. Now, when the army of Ashur was approaching to attack Jerusalem, Chizkiah stopped up the Gihon River, which is near the city, to deny the enemy soldiers a supply of drinking water. The sages disapproved because Chizkiah should have put his trust in God, who had brought down in Kings, Melachim, part 2, Perik, chapter 19, pasuk 34, I shall protect the city to save it. And 3, see the last one, Iber Nisan benisan v'lo odulo. He prolonged the year by adding a month of Nisan in Nisan, meaning he added an extra month to the year, making it a leap year after Nisan had begun. But the sages did not agree with him because once Nisan has begun, it is too late to add an extra month. Now, the Jewish months are based on a lunar system, meaning each month coincides with the revolution of the moon around the earth. 12 of these months form a regular year. However, such a year is about 11 days shorter than a solar year, which is the time it takes for the earth to go around the sun. The difference between the lunar and solar years presents a problem with regards to the holidays, because the festivals, the holidays must fall on certain dates of the lunar months, yet they must also fall in particular seasons which are determined by the solar year. Pesach, for example, which starts on the 15th of the month of Nisan, must always occur in the spring. If no adjustment is made, the monthly dates of the holidays would gradually shift away from the required seasons. So to prevent this shift, an extra month is added to every second or third year, making it a leap year, so that the lunar and solar years become aligned more closely. The new month starts immediately after the month of Adar, and it is called the second Adar. Each year, a special court would decide whether to add a month to that year. Now, the decision to add a month must be made before the last day of the month of Adar, and not later, as the Gemara says on Masechet Sanhedrin, page 12b. The Gemara over there on page 11a, 11b discusses the factors that they considered regarding to make an extra month or not. Nowadays, the timing of the leap years is determined by a fixed calendar. In any event, Chizkiah, he added a month of Nisan in Nisan, and the sages disagreed with him because, like we said, once Nisan had begun, it is too late to add an extra month. And that is in Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.